This is Bottled Up with Daniel Posner, owner of Grapes the Wine Company, a fine wine retailer in White Plains, New York. The Wall Street Journal called me one of the most influential wine retailers in America. Here to remind you that wine does not have to be complicated, and it definitely doesn't have to be snobby. Bottled Up gives you a fresh idea on what to drink, insight into the new trends, and a real look inside the wine industry. It's not about tannins or tasty notes you can't pronounce. It's about enjoying wine with a fresh spin. Welcome to episode number 14 of Bottled Up, the world's #1 podcast about everything and anything. I'm your co-host, Daniel Posner. Very special guest today, retailer to the stars, Benjamin Aneff of Tribeca Wine Merchants, Board of Directors, National Association of Wine Retailers, and President, yes, El Jefe of the United States Wine Trade Alliance. Mr. Aneff, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining.
Daniel, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So by way of background, Ben's been in the wine business for 20 years.
Despite our age difference. That's the biggest barrier.
No, he looks good for 26, right? Ben's been Tribeca Wine Merchants for 20 years, managing partner for 10 years, and retailer like me. He's in Lower Manhattan. Tribeca Wine Merchants opened in about 2001, started there about 5 years later. So similar paths, because Grapes Wine Company started in 1997 and I came in 2000. And we have both destroyed otherwise successful businesses. We are going to start with questions from the audience. Our favorite listener, Kim from Brooklyn, asks a question: vacation wines, do they taste better, fact or fiction? Ben, you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, look, that's a great question. And
I'm just going to prepare the audience. That's a great question is going to appear from Ben Aneff 30 more times. The term "that's a great question," like we should have t-shirts. There should be a t-shirt on the front that says Daniel's always right. And on the back, it should say, "That's a great question, Ben Aneff."
For me, does the same wine taste in Provence as it does in New York City? It's complicated. I think the wine itself is the thing, but the reality, wine for most of us is about a whole experience. It's about a memory. It's about who you're with, how you drink it, where you drink it, and it all plays a part.
I get clients who tell the story. They go to a bistro in Paris, or they're in Florence and they're out at a cafe and they order a carafe of wine. They say, how come I can't get a great carafe of wine in New York for €5 or $5? And I have to remind them that carafe of wine probably was not that good. But in the whole moment of experience, who they were with, that whole aura of like maybe the beach was there, maybe they're in Provence, to your point, like the overall experience elevated and made that $5 bucket of wine taste good. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the other piece there is, I think wine in general, there's a huge band of any individual wine. If you have the same wine 20 different times, you effectively have 20 different drinks. If you want to drink the same thing that tastes exactly the same every single time you drink it, have Lipton iced tea or a Diet Pepsi.
Lipton is one of our sponsors. Thanks for pointing that out.
Absolutely.
Yep. Cheers to Lipton.
Yes. And thank you, Lipton, for once again. But I really mean that. I mean, I've had so many great wine experiences, and that's one of the really challenging things as well. When you try to go replicate them, you had a really magical bottle. I remember an old story. I was given a bottle of 78 Bonmar from Dujac from a great old distributor friend of ours. He had gotten it when he worked for Wildman, when Wildman had Dujac. He wanted to sell the wine, but it looked terrible. I mean, the wine looked awful. And he asks, what could I get for this? And so I look at the pricing and I tell him, look, the market is here, but this bottle doesn't look great. If I sell it to a client and they come back and say, look, this wine was problematic, I'd like a return, I'm going to ask you for a return. Or we can find a lower price, somewhere in the middle where you're happy with what you get, but there's a firm no takesies backsies rule. And he says, let's do that. Let's do the no takesies backsies. So I call my friend and say, look, I've got this unicorn bottle that literally looks like it was buried by somebody's dog in their backyard. And the fill is okay, but it doesn't look pristine by any imagination. And my buddy was born in 86. I said, I'll bring a bottle of 86 Margaux. You bring this and we'll have dinner and see what it works, see what we think. And he says, yeah, okay. We do the Burgundy first because we're going light to heavy and do the Margaux at the end. But that bottle of Dujac was so magical that no one could possibly have cared less about the Margaux. But the other side of that coin is I have no ability to replicate that experience. I can have another 25 bottles of Dujac 78 Bonmar. It's never going to happen again.
But the wine was great. First of all, 86 Margaux I poured for my wedding table. So you are going. And full circle, one of the most surprising best wines in my 40th birthday weekend soiree time, 77 Dujac Clos Saint Denis. I had bought a bunch of bottles on a lark, of course.
Your high school graduation year, I'm guessing.
Yeah, 1977, which would put me at about 1959. You're close. Yeah. I was left back a few years. So I was actually 1950, but good try. And I remember emailing your probably good friend and name dropping Jeremy Sess at the time after I drank the first bottle of a couple that I had throughout. And I said, wow, this bottle's amazing. And he was like, why do you own that bottle of wine? And I was like,
it's crazy.
First
77.
year, why not? And he's like, I have no idea how that wine could possibly still be drinkable. So there you go. Let's move on. That was the longest segment of Kim from Brooklyn. Thank you, Kim. We love you. We love that you listen to us. And thank you so much for joining and giving that engaging question. We went from Provence Rosé to 78 Dujac Bone Mar like that.
Well, Jeremy has a little Provence Rosé too. A nice thread there.
Look, his family's got to eat, right? I mean, so there you go. Domaine de Tria and Rosé.
Donations at the bottom here, please.
Tip jar. So, Ben, tell us about your favorite, most recent bite, sip, taste. I'll remind our audience, bite is just recent great food. It could be Kraft macaroni and cheese with the kids.
My most favorite bite recently was the gnocchi frito at Cisiamo in Manhattan. Fabulous, fabulous restaurant from the Danny Meyer Group. And they do a cacio e pepe gnocchi frito that is about as good as it gets. It's a perfect starter. And if you haven't been to Cisiamo, I highly recommend it for everybody.
Cisiamo, by the way, is CI space SIAMO, correct? Is that? Look at that.
Very good. Absolutely.
Spelling bee champ last year, third grade. AMOUREUSES. Amarous.
Very good. Very good, sir.
Dude, 26 years in the wine business. If you can't spell Amarous, get the fuck out of the wine business. That's what But Cisiamo, great restaurant in New York City. Gnocchi cacio e pepe. I can't say I've ever had.
Gnocchi frito. If you think when you go to Modena or that part, gnocchi frito will be something you start with, this sort of little fried dough, and they do a cacio e pepe version of it that is just exactly what it sounds like, and it is magical. It is so umami and delicious and hedonism, and if you like that flavor profile, it's tough to beat.
Okay, good to know. It sounds great, by the way, and I'm glad you're going to take me for lunch someday. Now, your favorite, most recent sip?
My favorite sip recently, my favorite memorable sip that I had in the last few weeks. I have 2 young kids under 5, so I'm not doing as much drinking as I usually have been or usually would, but I was on a great trip in France a few weeks ago and had the great privilege of going to Jean-Louis Chauve, and he poured for us the 71 Hermitage.
Wow.
And the industry you hear a lot of sort of problematic stories in the press, etc. And there are a lot of concerns in the industry for various reasons, but sometimes it's just great to remember how truly magical our world is and how special wine is. And those moments, those experiences, and tasting with Jean-Louis and slowly walking through how he builds Hermitage from Bessar and Lemial and their meat, and then all of these different parcels of the vineyard.
Anyone doesn't know, so Chauve literally parcel by parcel and then does a final blend.
Exactly right.
So when you go taste, if the wine is still in barrel, you could go back in history of wine critics will show you a huge rating score because it's hard to know what the final blend is. And I don't even think he'll pour a hypothetical blend. Maybe he will, but it's a huge variation because you don't know what the wine is going to look like until he decides he knows what it's going to be. It's an old way of making wine that very respectful and obviously works for Jean-Louis Chauve, one of the great producers of Hermitage. Right. And favorite overall recent taste.
Got to shout out a neighbor, Forgione by Mark Forgione, right effectively next door to us in Tribeca. I must have eaten there at least 100 times, but their chicken under a brick is just dynamite. There are so few restaurants, I think, that manage to really successfully let you go either way, meaning you can have a really special occasion dinner where you're bringing people you really want to impress and you want to have an incredible meal, or where you can just have a casual Tuesday night dinner. And Forgione does as good a version of that as just about any restaurant I know. He has some other really terrific restaurants as well, like Peasant. But the old Forgione is still to this day one of my very favorite restaurants, and had a great meal there just a few days ago.
Oh, good to hear. Before we get into the rant, I just do want to mention a couple of important things about Ben Aneff. I touched on U.S. Wine Trade Alliance. For anyone out there who follow the wine tariffs that go on in the United States,
the man wholly responsible for fighting those tariffs is Ben Aneff. Ben and I worked very hard in the early days of those tariffs, 2019 and 2020, and helping create an alliance called the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance. Ben was the obvious choice for president of that alliance, and he sits there to this day, does tremendous work between two young kids, running a very successful retail wine shop, and heading to DC a lot for the U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, meeting with all those important people in DC, and of course, getting seemingly nowhere with it because that's how the government works. But Ben works very hard, and we would be remiss if we did not mention all of that hard work. So huge round of applause for Ben for all that hard work. Thank you for all you've done in your 7 years of fighting wine tariffs. So I want to
Well, thank you, Daniel.
Thank you.
Lots of
Thank you
people
for your
work really hard on
service,
it.
as we say. Now we will move on to the most important part of the programming. We do call it the rant. So, Ben, what has you bottled up today?
Well, today we find ourselves in a moment where so many of the great wines that you and I grew up drinking have gotten incredibly expensive. And I often think about how difficult it is for people coming into the fine wine business who are coming in when you and I would have come in, around the same age, and how much more difficult it is to drink great wine at a reasonable price point.
We saw a story of like when I started in the wine business, it was a few years before you, in 2001, 2002, you could literally pay whether it was 50 or 75 bucks, and you can go to Sotheby's and Christie's auction houses, and you could drink a sampling of all the wines being auctioned off that week, like the next day. I mean, the amount of crazy first growth Bordeaux from the 1980s, all the DRCs I was able to try. You mentioned Chave, even like Cuvée Catalan. The shit being poured for 50 or 75 bucks as a consumer that you could drink and get educated pretty quickly, or me as a wine merchant who knew nothing about wine back then and still knows nothing, but I still got to drink a lot of great wine, and that just doesn't exist.
I mean, look, I remember doing all of the Dujac wines at a Saturday tasting, including all of the Grand Crus other than Chambertin and RSV.
Yep.
I remember doing a series of Solos wines gratis on a Wednesday night, fun. I was recently at a restaurant, and I'm not going to name check it, but I saw a terrific allocated wine, and it was at a 10x markup.
That means if it was $100 cost to the restaurant, they're charging $1,000 for all you math majors out there. $1,000 for wine that costs them $100.
Right. And there's a lot of really good reasons why the prices of many wines have gone up. I completely understand it. And by and large, the wine industry is a low margin industry. But my rant is what I would suggest is restaurants that price their top wines in a way such that they will never sail is problematic. It's not good for the industry. It's not even good for their bottom line. It's not good for the winery, and it's not good for consumers.
Because to your point, winemakers, like someone like Chave might see it. You mentioned you could see like Dujac, the Cess family could come in and see what you're charging for Bonmar or Claude de la Roche or whatever. Like, oh, the restaurant, these phantom prices, because that's kind of what they are almost. They're just total reaches, and people, oh, I should charge more. And that's how you get in this coastery scenario of insanity of pricing on coastery, Corton, Charlemagne. The importer starts seeing what retailers charge. I mean, the list goes on, but yeah, it's restaurant pricing, which has been covered. I'm sure we can mention somewhere in this podcast other episodes where we've talked about egregious restaurant pricing. I've touched on wines by the glass as a very sore spot for me personally, but it's out of control. And all it does is hurt our industry, as you said. It hurts us to get bottles in the hands of the consumer, right?
Inevitably, people talk about how much more difficult it is to drink at great restaurants here in the United States than it is overseas. And part of that, there's nothing we're going to do anything about, right? If you're buying X cellar, there's nothing that can be done. And that's completely understandable. But there are restaurants that do a really good job of making sure that they have a really profitable, amazing wine program, but also offer world-class wines at very good prices and have some things that are values for people who really love and value food and wine together. I mean, all of the Danny Meyer Group, for one, is famous for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're a 3 Michelin star restaurant, whatever you believe the price is for a 3 Michelin star meal, you should have a bottle that is a 3 Michelin star bottle. And very often the prices that are there, I see, they wouldn't be at the same level, from a hierarchy perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it feels like there are restaurants that would prefer clients. By no means do I mean all, but there are some restaurants I feel that would prefer clients that aren't actually food and wine lovers. They're happy to have a great meal with a tremendous bottle of wine.
The old corporate expense account argument, right? Like,
yeah, sure.
The Amex Black Card person that has the unlimited resources for that night to dine wine and not really care, right? Because
If you're a restaurant, you get the allocations of all of the great wines of the world, and you're not regularly selling those bottles, it means the prices are wrong, right?
Yep.
Because the demand should be off the charts. And if you're a special occasion restaurant, which by and large, if you're a 2 or 3 Michelin star restaurant, that should be the time and place where people are most incentivized to pick out that special wine.
Mhm.
But I think, Daniel, you and I both know lots of restaurants in the Northeast where it's a museum. All of their top wines are a museum, and they have 3 to 6 bottles of every great wine, effectively almost 100% of their full allocation for 10 years back or for a series of years back on lots of the great wines. And I think that's a shame. It's a different thing if what you're doing is saying, look, on the very young vintages, I want to hold them back, but that's not what's happening.
Nope.
They're priced in such a way that even the wealthiest person on a special occasion who knows the wines is going to say that is a bad value and I'm not going to pay for it. And by the way, you have a choice. The Grill is another great option of a place that gets tremendous allocations of world-class wines, and they sell them. They always offer some wines at good values. And every time I'm there, I see people buying great wines. Marais is another one that I see people buying the great wines at reasonable prices for the experience. And then there are some other really special restaurants where I've asked my friends and they've asked their friends and they've asked all of their friends, and no one has ever even heard of someone that would buy a top end bottle of wine to match that really top dining experience. And I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I mean, you've done a lot of name dropping, so kudos to you on that.
On the positive end, end.
I'll be the contrarian, and it's a restaurant no longer in business, so I can do that. But literally, I can go back over 20 years where I first dined at Boulay, and I'd called in advance. Boulay is probably down near where you were.
I share a wall with the old Boulay.
I dined there, and I think I'm going back probably like 2004, I would say. And I called in advance, and corkage was $80 or $85 a bottle, whatever it was. And I brought in, it was 4 of us. We had no children. So we brought in 3 bottles of wine, and the wine director at the time was still in the wine business, so no need to mention his name and not his doing, but it was like, sir, and he didn't know me at that time. He didn't know how famous I would become. He said, sir, you realize the corkage is $85 per bottle. And I said, sir, you realize the markups on the wine in your restaurant, right? I mean, even back then they were at like 5X on things. And by the way, of course, now fast forward, I'm sure there was great deals now when you look back. But the wine list pricing was crazy. I was happy to pay $85 corkage.
You probably missed out on a 99 Jaillet Cros Parento.
Yep.
But you got your Justin Cabernet. I'm just teasing.
I brought good wine. Justin Reserve Cabernet. I was baller. 1990 Jaillet Cros Parento in Burgundy at Limoise, probably in 2002 for €300 a bottle. I don't know if it's a 2-star or 3-star these days. And I don't know at the time when I dined there what it was, but the only time I've ever seen this wine and obviously B consumed it, it was just released at the 2010 Gonan San Josef VA Vin.
Yeah.
€200 on the list.
Yeah.
And the guy looked at me and was like, how do you know about this wine? It's like, I was with Burgundy importers, Burgundy people, and they're like, we're drinking Rhone. I was like, we're 100% drinking Rhone tonight. I was like, we'll never see this bottle ever again. And maybe at Tribeca Wine Merchants, they have a great allocation of going on San Josef VA Vina. Grapes Wine Company, we do not.
We've had 1 bottle of that wine, and we bought it from a great cellar, but I've never had the opportunity to try it.
And I posted it, of course, on social media after that. That was 5 years ago, probably. And I had 2 different wine critics reach out because I didn't post where I had it purposely. I was like, I just had this wine. 2 different wine critics. Daniel, where did you get that bottle? Because it's so rare. I don't know production on that wine, and it's never made. It's made once every 5 or 10 years at the most.
Oh, I think they made it twice.
They've only made it twice. So there you go. Yeah. So look, I have 1 up on Ben Aneff going on San Jose Vivine. He's never had it. This guy's had it. So kudos to me. Yeah, I agree with you though. I mean, wine pricing in restaurants, I think wine pricing in general, I've talked about. We've touched on Napa. We had Chris Carpenter on. We had Kevin Zarelli on, America's first wine sommelier. He mentioned on the show that he never orders wine at restaurants anymore. He'd rather pay the corkage. He just can't.
I mean, that's
a guy who like built up the greatest wine program in the country, and he just says he can't do it.
I mean, he's the prototype for the modern sommelier. Absolutely.
Yeah.
How sad.
It is sad, and it's frustrating because it goes back the full circle for us as we're in a period of time where wine consumption is at its lowest levels it's been since you were born in 1960. So ish, it's a huge problem, and we need to get people drinking more, particularly with meals. We need to get them enjoying wine with meals rather than the cocktail, rather than the beer, rather than the NA. We need them to get ordering bottles of wine to sit on a table so that dinner for 2, dinner for 4, even dinner for 1, you get a great bottle of wine to go with that great food. And it's just not happening. And a lot of it starts with egregious pricing. And it's unfortunate.
Look, the good news is I do see so many restaurants who do it so well.
Yep.
And It is such a magical thing. I mean, to have to share a great bottle of wine with your friends and family
Mhm.
over a terrific meal is such a special experience. And the restaurants that do it right, their customers come back time and time and time again.
You've mentioned some serious restaurants and some great ones. Do you have local restaurants for you? Local being either Queens or near Tribeca, where you used to live in Brooklyn, or they're local, just good, not great restaurants that you would say people can go to and feel good about? Like I always mentioned, the red tablecloth, typical Italian restaurant that you feel good. You can order a great bottle of Chianti Classico and not get ripped off and enjoy it. Do you have those go-to places? Because I think that's where I'm remiss on. Those wine lists are the ones that I think suffer the most these days. That's
I
where
mean,
the
look,
average consumer's going.
at least in the city, it's not necessarily you don't need a white tablecloth dining experience. But the success of Great Psalms has seen so many casual restaurants that have incredible wine lists. And the wine industry is about relationships. And so finding those places where the sommelier has great relationships with great suppliers to get those great wines, that's really tough. You have to mention Claude and Penny these days.
Mhm.
Narita, which is just unbelievable on
Yep.
St. Mark's Place. Crazy food,
People,
fabulous wine list.
great service. I agree. Norita is a hidden gem out there. They do exist, to your point. They exist. It's just people have to find. I think we do need to talk about more of those places. The Grill is a very expensive restaurant, right? So maybe less about the Grill, more about Norita, right?
No, I think you're right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Well,
Like
and the good news is, like, there are so many folks that are young people in New York City, at least. There are so many really passionate wine lovers that, in New York. And I see young people that know more and are more obsessed than certainly when I started. Now, look, your ability to know wine, the barrier to entry, which used to not just be price, but it was knowledge, right? And experience. You couldn't gain that experience. Now, with social media and Instagram, if you're a young person and you're following Psalms or other just wine lovers on social media and see what they're drinking and where they're drinking it and learn about those producers, it is so incredible. I see people that started drinking effectively 6 weeks ago, and 9 months later, they're the ones asking about, hey, have you had the Ganon VV? And my response is always, one, no, and two, how on earth do you even know what
right.
that wine is? You should have to put 10 years into the business or into being obsessed with wine before you've even heard of that wine. So that barrier to entry has really dropped.
And you talked about like the Solos example, right? And talking about champagne.
Oh,
And then you
sure.
get people who are like, oh, do you have any Solos?
Grower champagnes have
That's
just
where I'm going.
exploded. It's
Right,
amazing.
but then you get that ultimate cherry picker, and I don't mean in a bad way, who just sees that whole baller move of just drinking Solos. You're like, oh, I only want Solos, and it's like, come on, dude.
Right.
There's dozens of producers I could show you that. Again, are they as good as Solos? No. Are they going to cost you 1/10 the price? Yes. And that barrier entry certainly has shrunk, but like we also need to widen that selection to those people. And I don't know where they come from because obviously we could have a whole other topic on social media influencing, et cetera, and how that plays a role in all this. But I've started following a lot of people like that, and you see what they're drinking. And to your point, you can go to France still, you can go to Europe and drink perhaps those wines, quote unquote, reasonably if you find the right spot. When you look at Chablis, everybody just talks about Dauvissat and Ravenot.
Sure.
There's still great Chablis out there. And I know you only drink Dauvissat and Ravenot. I had a 2002 Ravenot Le Clos in Magnum. We had 24 Magnums on release. Magnums. I have zero of those. But isn't that crazy? I don't even know if I've seen one since.
I've never seen that many magnums for Ravenot.
Yeah, it was nuts. But it's up to retailers, but it's also up to restaurants. Wine programs are important. Get people drinking those wines, right?
Well, look, I do think we have seen consumers are willing to try more wine. One of the really exciting things happening in the wine business. Obviously, everyone knows the explosion of grower champagnes, but even in Burgundy, there have been under the radar world-class winemakers in less famous appellations for a very long time that, you or I would have drunk and loved, but for a long time people would say, well, that's not Chassagne or Meursault or Puligny. And now people are recognizing, oh my God, these wines are absolutely incredible. And by the way, restaurants are on the forefront of Great Psalms showing some of those wines to folks. I think producers like Dury Gential or Jean-Marc Vincent out of Santenay, a little bit older. Obviously, the icon there is Hubert Lamy out of Saint-Aubin. And then you get Pierre-Yves Forneral from the Cotonouille. And when you find restaurants that have really knowledgeable somms and great relationships with the suppliers, because all of these wines are hard to get, then you can have a really world-class drinking experience for a much lower reasonable price point. And the other thing I'd always recommend for consumers is become a local at that restaurant. If you have a somm that you really love and a restaurant that you love, become the local, because then when they do get those 3 bottles of, Forneral and you really want to try one, and by the way, the white and the red are both magical, and the Rue de Foin is hen's teeth, but nuts. But you're going to be one of the people that they give the look to. Wine is still ultimate, like the great wines, like it or not, are pretty scarce. They're hard to find. And the downside of how transparent things are now is it means there's more eyeballs, there's more people searching out for those wines are harder to find. So having a relationship with those folks and being willing to try suggestions, I think is still so much fun. That's one of the things that I find so fun about the wine industry is I'm really lucky to have Chambers, right? The restaurant Chambers with Pascaline Lepelletier right down the road. And she always pours something that I've never heard of. If you'd given me 1,000 guesses, I wouldn't have been able to tell you what the wine was. And it's so fascinating, so interesting, so delicious. It's such a cool aspect of the industry. And the other piece there's always a real person, a real human being that's behind that wine. Someone really farmed the land, spent years perfecting these wines, and before they're finally brought to the greatest wine city in the world, New York City. And so to still be able to be surprised so often is really fun.
All right, this has been just way too positive for a rant. So let's bring it full circle. Let's get a little negative. Underlying theme is restaurants need to be better about their lists, right? Need to up their game, lower their pricing, up their selection, right? I mean, take a little bit off.
You just want to solve the problem for the consumers. People that want a world-class dining experience deserve a world-class drinking experience. I think that's right.
I agree. I have too many friends these days who go to those restaurants who don't order a bottle of wine. Like literally will sit through some 6-course, 8-course, 10-course. They'll look at the wine pairing menu and they're like, oh, that's $300.
You've absolutely failed.
Yeah. And it's a shame because they won't put in that same time. I'm like, you're there for like 3 hours. It's crazy to me not to enjoy, to your point, world-class wine with world-class meals, or, not world-class meals, just really good meals, really fun. Even like I said, your local dining establishment. Find the local restaurant that you love, get them to up their game a little bit with your help, and I think it'll go a long way because there's room for improvement. There's room for improvement in retail selections, obviously. We all know that, especially down in Tribeca. And there's definitely room for improvement at restaurants.
I love a gin and tonic every once in a while, but the reality is when you go to a restaurant, you open a bottle of wine to share. And a cocktail, you're sitting for you to enjoy on your own. Have something to share with your friends and family. That's always my vote.
Yeah, good advice from Ben Aneff, Tribeca Wine Merchant, National Association of Wine Retailers, U.S. Wine Trade Alliance, and retailer to all the stars in Lower Manhattan. Ben, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I do appreciate it, and I look forward to you buying my next meal at the grill.
Well, Daniel, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. Hope to see you soon.
Do I mention your name for the house account? Is there a code word at the grill so I can dine there? Is the code word Harman Skurnik?
That's exactly Harman Skurnik.
We'll see if he's listening. With that, Ben, thank you again. Hope everyone enjoyed, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks for hanging out with us on this episode of Bottled Up. If this episode gave you a new bottle to try or a new way to think about wine, share it with someone you'd open a bottle with. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And as always, drink what you love. I'm Daniel Posner, and we'll see you next time.